Around the years 50 BC to 660 AD, three royal governments were formed in the Korean peninsula, which were Shilla, Baekje, and Goguryeo, among which the Shilla government had more authority. During these days, Buddhism became popular. Later, the Silla government gained power and succeeded in annexing Baekje in 660 and Goguryeo in 668 with the help of China. In 676 AD, the newly united country was able to expel the Chinese forces from Korean soil and take full control of the Korean peninsula. In 918 AD, once again a ruler named Wang Kun was able to form a single government in the Korean peninsula and named it Goryeo. But this government also came under the influence of nobles of various states who were considered descendants of Shilla country. Despite all this, Goryeo's rule lasted until 1231, when the Mongols conquered the country and then Confucianism spread in Korea. In 1260, the Mongol rule ended and the Goryeo government was re-established. The island of Korea was formed, consisting of Shilla, Baekje and Goguryeo, among which the Shilla government had more authority. During these days, Buddhism became popular. With the help of China, the Silla government managed to annex Baekje in 660 and Goguryeo in 668. In 676 AD, the newly united country was able to expel the Chinese forces from Korean soil and take full control of the Korean peninsula. The division of Korea into North and South Korea originated from the victory of the Allies in World War II in 1945 and the end of 35 years of Japanese rule over Korea. In a plan that was overwhelmingly opposed by the Koreans, the United States and the Soviet Union agreed to temporarily take over the country from the 38-degree latitude. The purpose of the trusteeship plan was to help establish a provisional Korean government that would become independent and free in due course. However, although the date of the election was set, the Soviet Union refused to cooperate with the United Nations plans to hold free and general elections in the two Koreas, and as a result, a communist government supported by the Soviet Union was permanently established in the north, and a pro-Western government in the south. The two superpowers sided with different leaders. Two separate governments were established in the country, each claiming to rule the entire peninsula. Since the 1990s, with South Korean governments becoming more liberal and the death of North Korea's founder Kim Il-sung and the succession of his son Kim Jong-il, both sides have taken small symbolic steps for the possible annexation of the two Koreas. Currently, there is a common feeling in South Korea that the U.S. military presence is preventing the unification of the two Koreas. This war was the result of the division of Korea after World War II. This country was occupied by Japan from 1905 until the end of World War II. With Japan's defeat in World War II, American forces entered the southern part of the Korean peninsula and Soviet forces entered the northern part, and the line known as the 38-degree circle was determined as the border of the two sides. Efforts to hold free elections across the Korean peninsula have been unsuccessful, raising tensions between the two sides. A right-wing government united by the United States in the southern part and a united communist government by the Soviet Union came to power in the northern part, both of which claimed to rule over the entire Korean peninsula and have never recognized the other side. The Communist forces of North Korea, which had absolute superiority over the southern neighbor in terms of military equipment, successfully passed the initial stages of the war and occupied almost all of Korea except for the Busan Peninsula in the southeast. But with the arrival of the UN forces commanded by them, Douglas MacArthur, the military governor of the United States in Japan, was in charge. On September 15, 1950, U.S. amphibious forces landed in Incheon Port, 160 kilometers behind North Korean army lines, and captured this city, and 10 days later, Seoul fell into the hands of South Korean forces again. On October 1, UN forces crossed the 38-degree orbit, and on October 19, Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea, was captured by them. The UN forces then advanced to the Yalu River on the China-Korea border and occupied almost the entire peninsula. But at this stage, the arrival of millions of Chinese soldiers, under the title of volunteer forces, changed the situation, and North Korean and Chinese forces again advanced to Seoul. However, the UN forces occupied Seoul again and pushed the North Korean and Chinese forces back to the 38-degree orbit. Since July 1951, the war has been defeated and armistice negotiations between the two sides began. These negotiations led to an armistice agreement 2 years later, after the defeat of the Democrats in America and the beginning of Eisenhower's presidency in July 1953, and the 38-degree circle as the border of the two sides was determined. This treaty still maintains its validity and a peace treaty has not been signed between the two countries. On June 25, 1950, North Korea attacked South Korea. 7 infantry divisions and 1 tank brigade started the operation. The United Nations got to work, and on the same day, the United Nations Security Council, without the presence of the Soviet Union, which had boycotted the meeting due to giving China's seat to Taiwan, passed a resolution demanding the cessation of hostilities and the withdrawal of North Korea to the north of the 38 orbit. Graded on June 27, 1950, the United Nations Security Council approved, at the suggestion of the United States, that the forces of several member states of that organization rushed to counter the North Korean attack on South Korea. Following this decision, America and 15 other countries sent their military forces to participate in the war. General Douglas MacArthur was in charge of the UN forces until 1951. During this time, the North Korean forces were advancing at a high speed on the territory of South Korea. Communist China entered the battlefield in favor of North Korea as a defense of its borders and because it would not be the next target. Chinese soldiers were initially present on the fronts as volunteers, but their regular divisions later came into action and in November 1950 inflicted heavy blows on the American forces. From this month, the withdrawal of the UN troops began and continued. Until the third day of December 1952, Seoul once again fell into the hands of Chinese and North Korean forces. The counterattack of American forces finally led to their recapture of Seoul on April 27, 1952. In the meantime, General MacArthur was removed from the Allied command and General Matthew Ridgway replaced him. The reason for this action was MacArthur's plan to nuke the Chinese border with North Korea to prevent the influx of Chinese soldiers. Following the last offensive attack by the Communists on May 16, 1953 and the fall of Seoul, the UN forces launched a final attack and reoccupied Seoul. Attempts to negotiate between the parties began in June. However, small wars were still going on that caused heavy casualties. During this time, only the Chinese soldiers made a strong attack. Starting with Lee in 1948, a series of authoritarian governments took power in South Korea with the support and influence of the Americans. With the coup of Park Chung-hee in 1961, a new economic policy began. In order to promote economic development, the policy of export-oriented industrialization was used. Park developed South Korea's economy through a series of highly successful 5-year plans. South Korea's economic development was supported by chaebol, large family-owned companies such as Samsung, Hyundai, SK Group, and LG. Chaebol obtained financial support through tax exemptions and cheap loans and took advantage of cheap South Korean labor to produce export products. The government made education a very high priority in order to create an educated population that can be effective in the production of the economy. Despite occasional political instability, the South Korean economy experienced tremendous growth for almost 40 years thereafter, in a period known as the Miracle of the Han River. This unprecedented economic miracle took South Korea from one of the poorest countries in the world after the Korean War to a fully developed country within a generation. Due to Soviet influence, North Korea established a communist government with hereditary leadership with ties to China and the Soviet Union. Kim Il-sung was supreme leader until his death in 1994, after which his son Kim Jong-il took over. Kim Jong-il's son, Kim Jong-un, is the current leader who assumed power after his father's death in 2011. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, North Korea's economy went into sharp decline and now relies heavily on international aid for food and trade with China. South Korea finally moved to a market democracy due to popular demand for political reforms in 1987, and the following year became the second Asian country to host the 1988 Summer Olympics. South Korea's economy has moved from exporting cheap and low-value industries to higher-value industries such as information technology, shipbuilding, automobile manufacturing, and petrochemical industries. Today, South Korea is a leading economy and a technology powerhouse, even competing with countries such as the United States in information and communication technology. South Korean pop culture has also flourished abroad in recent years in a phenomenon known as the Korean Wave. Seoul is the capital and largest city of the Republic of Korea, commonly known as South Korea. The heart of Seoul consists of two areas, including the vicinity of Incheon Metropolis and Gyeonggi Province, and is the 16th largest city in the world. The Seoul metropolitan area is home to half of the country's 22.50 million population, along with 678,102 foreign residents. And the city of Seoul has a population of about 10 million people. Seoul has been considered one of the main settlements in its region for more than 2,000 years, and its foundation dates back to 18 BC. In the years 18 BC 660 AD, Baekje, one of the three main kingdoms of Korea, placed its capital in what is now southeast of Seoul. This city was the capital of the Chosun dynasty in the years 1910–1392. After the formation of South Korea in 1948, Seoul was chosen as the capital of this country. The word Seoul in Korean means the capital. The word Seoul is a Korean term and means the capital city. This city was known as Hansang from the beginning of its formation, but in 1911, it was renamed to Gyeongsang. The city has been officially called Seoul since 1945, when Korea was liberated from Japanese colonial rule after 35 years. Seoul has a continental climate with 4 distinct seasons that include hot and humid summers and cold and relatively dry winters. The average high temperature is 1 degree Celsius in January and 29 degrees Celsius in July. The average annual rainfall that Seoul receives is 1.370 millimeters, 70% of which usually falls between July and September. Seoul is divided into 2 parts by the Han River, which flows from east to west and towards the Yellow Sea. Administratively, the city consists of 22 districts, GU, which are divided into 526 sub-districts. Commercial and trade centers are located in the central areas and increasingly in the southern part of the Han River. Factories are concentrated in the western part of the city, especially in Yongdang-po district. The poorest residential areas of the city are often located in the eastern part of the city. The northern side of the city is mountainous and has many parks, such as the presidential palace known as Cheongwada, which means the Blue House. 2 of the largest markets outside the city are located near the South Gate, Namdaemun, and Dongdaemun East Gate. Myeongdong, located in the central part of Seoul, nicknamed Ginza Seoul after Tokyo's high fashion district, is a shopping and fashion center for women, as well as the location of the largest Roman Catholic cathedral. From the 1960s to the mid-1990s, the southern part of the Han River witnessed unprecedented growth in the construction of stores and apartments for the upper middle class. Seoul has many historical and cultural monuments. Neolithic remains were excavated at the prehistoric site of Amsadong, Gangdong district, and were accidentally discovered by a flood in 1925. Urban planning was a key concept when Seoul was first designed as a capital in the late 14th century. The Joseon dynasty built the 5 grand palaces in Seoul: Changdeokgung, Changnyeonggong, Deoksugong, Gyeongbokgung, and Gyeongwigong, all in the Jongno and Yong districts, including Changdeokgung in 1997 as an outstanding example of palace architecture, and the design of the Far East Garden was added to the UNESCO World Heritage List. The main palace, Gyeongbokgung, underwent a large-scale restoration project. These palaces are examples of Chosun period architecture. Along with the palaces, Unhyeongong is known as the royal residence of Viceroy Dongwon, the father of Emperor Gojong at the end of the Joseon dynasty. Jangmyo Temple is the location of the ancestral tablets of the Joseon royal family, and Confucian memorial ceremonies for the royal family are held in this temple every year. Important national buildings such as Seoul City Hall and the Supreme Court are located in the central part of the city, and the National Assembly building is also located on Uedo Island in the southwest of the Han River. The imposing stone building in front of the Jungbok Palace was built by the Japanese in 1926 to serve as a seat for the all-powerful colonial government. This building was occupied by the South Korean government after 1945 and turned into a national museum in 1985. On August 15, 1995, the 50th anniversary of independence from Japan, the South Korean government began making changes in the way it was built to remove one of the most visible remnants of Japanese colonial rule. Population. In 2003, 9,714,000 people, or nearly a quarter of South Korea's population, lived in Seoul. Since 1945, rural to urban migration has increased throughout South Korea, with Seoul being the largest recipient of these migrations. Seoul's population grew rapidly after the Korean War, 1953-1950, from less than 1 million in 1945 to over 2 million in 1960, 5 million by 1970, 8 million by 1980, and 10 million by 1980. It reached 1988. In 1995, the population density of the city was around 16,900 people per square kilometer. Like South Korea as a whole, Seoul has a homogeneous population, with only a very small percentage of people of non-Korean ancestry, often consisting of foreign visitors and resident Chinese. The rapid growth of the population in Seoul has put a lot of pressure on the infrastructure and the environment, including traffic congestion, lack of housing, and air and water pollution. Seoul has 1.65 million registered vehicles, about 70% of which are passenger cars. The metro system was first built in 1974 and expanded greatly in 1980, carrying 5.32 million passengers daily. The development program of metro lines is still less indicative of solving problems such as traffic congestion, which is the cause of air and noise pollution, serious accidents and many inconsistencies in the city.